with the very tragic shooting on Wednesday night in Thousand Oaks. The killer was mentioned to have had PTSD to some extent. And I do a lot of work, as I have for years, with an organization that both studies and treats PTSD. And I wrote the person I work with there, an incredibly bright person named Gerard Choucroun. And I said, what does this mean for PTSD in terms of the optics of it, or people's perception of PTSD? Because to be quite honest, I was going to write an op-ed about PTSD for Veterans Day, and I think it just changed the tenor of ever doing that. And I reached out to Gerard and I asked him, hey, what does this change? And he was such an expert, as he always is, about PTSD. And a lot of times on the internet you read a lot of opinion, but there is something called expert advice, expert information. And I think that's very relieving to hear an expert talk. So Gerard was nice enough to sit by his phone and wait for me to get through all this lunacy to get to something I think is going to be very helpful to people. He is an expert in PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and he is currently the director of veterans programs at the Procido Trust in San Francisco, California. We're going to try to bring him in, so if you don't mind, if you could just bear with me for a minute while I work out the finer points of when it comes to the shooting last week in Thousand Oaks, and you hear a lot of people mentioning the killer having had PTSD to some degree or another. What extent, if any, did PTSD play into somebody in a mass shooting situation?
Well, I mean, first off, it's, I've never met him. We haven't diagnosed him. You got to be careful about diagnosing from far away. But, I think it's worth saying that this is like mass murder is not a logical extension of PTSD. I think you and I have talked about this, like PTSD is sort of lovely and sad, and that a lot of the damage becomes internal, where these external forces, if it's things like you can't sleep or recurrent difficult memories, or you kind of have emotional numbing, a lot of it usually happens to the person who's suffering from it. There's some research about increased aggression, like reactivity, road rage, and even domestic violence, which is not great, but it's not mass murder. That's an entirely different thing. And the problem with these sorts of events is that it's an easy out. It's an easy explanation. It's like a very Hollywood trope that like someone has been traumatized and then they go out and harm people to get back at them. But it's really, that's not how PTSD works. That's not what veterans are. That's not what veterans with PTSD are. He may have had PTSD. It certainly wouldn't have helped. But this kind of sociopath, like mass murder, that's not PTSD. And so some of the headlines are concerning when we conflate somebody who has problems sleeping and nightmares and health problems with somebody who goes out and shoots up a crowd. That's awful. It's different. It's terrible. But that's, if you solve PTSD, you're not solving that. That's not an explanation.
Right. I think that's the most important thing that anybody could take from this. And thank you. What a brilliant and generous thing you've done to say that. That is from an expert. That is such a relief to hear an expert. This is not your opinion. This is years of research going into that. And it echoes something that I wanted to say, and I wanted you to say it so that it wasn't a guy on his Instagram caption where sometimes you can suffer the slings and arrows of people thinking this and that about that. You just want to say, this is not PTSD. This is not vets. And you almost want to say to vets, this isn't you. We know this isn't you. To the people who are close to someone who's a vet, this is not your friend. This is not what your brother has. This is not what your sister has. This is not what your mom or dad has. This is different. And you setting that straight is maybe the most important message of the week on that.
Well, and just to vets who are out there, it's hard to go seek help for PTSD. No one wants to do it. It's an unpleasant thing. It's very isolating. So when you see images of people, shot up, you think that that's what people are going to think you are. So there's a sort of other thing going on where it adds to the stigma for people who really could get these symptoms taken care of fairly, quickly to sort of think they're going to be branded as a mass murderer if they seek help for PTSD. So it's important. That messaging is very helpful, and you've always been really great about that.
Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for being the one to say it. You have to understand about Gerard, he is a harbinger of hope. Every time I meet him, he gives me more good news. And I think there is good news. He isolates the good news and he focuses on the good news. And I'll be damned if that good news doesn't breed more good work. You just really are always on the brighter side of the the challenges. And every time I meet him, he's got better and better news. So there is someone out there, and there's a great team out there, and you're not the only one and not the only team, but the work you do, I believe, is peerless. And even when you're not thinking about it out there in the world, there are people who have made this their main focus in life, and they're fighting this fight. And Gerard, I couldn't thank you enough for coming on a Sunday night with such short notice, helping to give some insight to this. And we'll definitely be talking to you guys again soon in some other capacity when it comes to Heart and Armor. But thank you so much for coming on the show and making a real show out of it by doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're awesome. Thanks
Bye.
so much, Gerard Choucroun, everybody.
Bye.
Wow, that was really fantastic. That was great. And sometimes I find myself wanting to say things. Listen, if you can, get yourself a friend who's an expert and just go do that. Just say that thing, you know, like I play the guitar fairly well, not as good putting the thoughts I have together. He is a master at looking at this and making sense of it. And I hope you all had the feeling I had when he put some things in perspective for you. So what's going on there?